All right, give this a few minutes to let people sort of get on. In the new and improved homemade modern studio, kind of finally upgraded from the white background to something that, well, we're just going to show off some darker wood and steel, just a little bit better. So let's give it another minute or two. But while we're waiting, I'll give a little introduction about the sort of tools that we're going to go over today. Going to be using the new HP drill, now smaller and more compact. We'll be using, also from the HP line, the cutoff tool. This is really nice. It's a one-handed tool. I kind of use it to replace a angle grinder here or there when I want to get a little more intricate and don't need quite so much horsepower. I'm going to be using the angle grinder itself to cut steel. And one of the new metalworking tools that I'm really excited about, the portable bandsaw. I've been waiting for one of these for a really long time. It's always something I thought of as more as kind of like a specialty metalworking tool, but it's actually really handy in a lot of home improvement applications. And the fact that this works with the same batteries as all my other Ryobi tools, just one more reason to stay loyal to the brand. So, when I first started Homemade Modern, and my name's Ben, by the way, we did a lot of woodworking, a little bit of concrete work, and an occasional home improvement project. I really didn't get into metalworking until I was about 2 or 3 years in. And you know, I was kind of always thought of it as a little bit intimidating. There's so many sparks. I'm like, I don't have a welder. And woodworking just seemed more intuitive. But the more I got into it, the more I realized that one, metal can be very inexpensive as a raw material. Right now, lumber prices are about 2 to 3x because of COVID and also because of some of the fires. And more, I started working in metal just a little bit here or there. And what I saw is that from a design standpoint, it allowed me to make much thinner, more elegant lines on some of my DIY furniture builds. Then I built a shipping container house and really did a lot of cutting and welding. In fact, I cut all the windows and doors for the shipping container house using one of these guys right here. So pound for pound, probably the most powerful tool that I own. It's small and it's compact, but you can cut a shipping container in half with one of these. So that's pretty cool. So I'm going to start by showing 2 projects that I've done that I think sort of show a good place to start and then a place to sort of work your way up to. So this is a bench we made a couple years ago. We had just a couple of these mulberry boards, and it's kind of an unusual wood, so we couldn't really find more mulberry readily to sort of match them. So we wanted to make a project, but we just had this one kind of board that's very twisty. So woodworking joints and stuff like that were kind of, we're going to be a little bit too tricky with something that has this much movement. So what we did is we took about, $5 worth of angle steel, and we made these very custom brackets like this. They gave it a really nice sort of mid-century modern look. The only tools we needed to make these brackets was just an angle grinder to cut out the profile, and then the drill to drill the holes that would allow us to sort of attach the screws. The result is a basic level woodworking project that also has basic level metalworking and just looks a little bit different than a lot of the other sort of DIY benches out there. Now, once you get a little better at cutting, and if you mix sort of a welder into it, well, then you really open up a world of possibilities, which I've been experimenting lately with this bar/desk combination. There's a desk on the other side. We'll probably get to it later, but if you also just go to my Instagram, Ben Uyeda, you'll see this is one of the more recent posts. But this involved welding a steel frame. It was probably only about $120 worth of steel, and then we took these deck boards and put it right on there. So mixing wood with steel gives you a lot more options, and it's going to really make your design stand out. So the basics. First, we're going to start by just showing something really simple, how to drill a hole in steel. It's a little bit different than working with wood. The main difference is that you go a lot slower with the drill speed. Another really important thing is securing your work when you're working with steel in particular becomes really important. You wouldn't want the drill bit to get caught on this and spin a piece of steel with sharp corners around your workspace. Not a good thing. So we're going to start by securing the material. And now we're ready for some safety gear. Now, when I work with metal, I try to always go full face shield. This is one I really like. If you have a more traditional face shield that doesn't have this kind of tight coverage to your face, I recommend going eyeglasses underneath it or some sort of safety glasses and having those two layers. Trust me, I recently got a metal particle in my eye. It was not fun, resulted in a scratched cornea. All worked out, but face shields, way to go. All right, so we got a face shield, and sometimes when I'm in a hurry, I don't apply cutting oil before drilling the holes, but really for the life of your drill bits, it's good to apply a little bit of cutting oil. And what this oil does is it acts as sort of a heat sink. So when you're working with steel, the friction builds up quite a bit of heat. This also means you have to be careful not to touch it and burn yourself. So by applying cutting oil, what we do is it sort of lubricates it, reduces the heat buildup, and that fluid kind of distributes some of the heat away from the drill bit. When the drill bits get really hot, that's where they kind of get dull. So you don't want to burn out your drill bits and want to keep them nice and sharp. So I'm just going to apply the drill bit, just a little bit of pressure, carefully not to cut any of the vents, and got it on my drill setting. And I'm just going to barely pull the trigger a little bit. You're not drilling with the same speeds as you are with wood. And you want to see those nice little shavings spiraling up, just like that. So this is about a 1/8 inch diameter drill bit. This is often what I'll start with. And see those nice little shavings? That's because we weren't, ooh, it's warm. That's because we weren't drilling too fast. So they really kind of spiral up away there, and you're letting the metal and this harder metal on the drill bit cut into the softer steel. So now we're going to switch to a larger drill bit. Find one. And switch to a larger one. So you just kind of work your way up. I'll often use steel flat bar like this that I get from Home Depot if I need to make a really big mending plate. So they obviously have those already, but sometimes I need to kind of bring two boards together. Most recently I had to do that for a very large outdoor table, or sometimes I've had to repair old fences that were getting a little bit saggy. Just getting a cheap piece of flat steel like this, drilling a few holes exactly where you need them, then you can drive screws through here and reinforce the wood. All right, so we got a larger bit. We're just going to go right into the same hole. Oops, a little fast, but it went right through, no problem. All right, so that's drilling through steel. From there, you can now use mechanical fasteners to attach this to wood, bolt onto other steel pieces, but you're pretty much off to the races from there. Up next, we're going to go to the metal bandsaw. I'm so excited about this. I always thought that this was going to be, I was going to have to switch to a different battery platform to work with this kind of a piece of equipment. So props to Ryobi for coming out with it. So right here we have a piece of C-channel. Now, because of my background maybe with architecture, I've always liked these kind of more industrial looking metal sections. I just think they have a cool kind of vintage industrial vibe. Also, a channel like this is really sturdy for how lightweight it is. Much more so than just a flat bar itself. So again, if you were working with some live edge slabs and you had a crack on it and you didn't want that crack to go any farther, you could route out a channel underneath the tabletop and really insert something like this in there to really provide a lot of stiffness and keep everything all together. So we're going to cut this. First we're going to secure it to the work surface. And I'm going to mark a line on it. Now, a typical pencil doesn't show up too well on dark steel that has a lot of mill scale like this. So I either like to use a red or silver colored pencil. They often sell these at a lot of metalworking shops. I'm just going to draw my line. Actually, I'm going to cut just a smaller piece off. All right, so there we got a nice clear line. And we're ready for this guy. So, you see right here, let me take the battery off while I give it a little demo. It's basically like a little miniature bandsaw, not too dissimilar from one of the first woodworking tools I ever used.
The difference is that it's portable and you actually hand hold it as opposed to a desktop tool. Now it has this little backstop right here, so we're going to put that right up against the steel, and then we can line that blade up with the line that we cut or that we drew. The reason I like this tool is that look at how thin that blade is. Cutting with the angle grinder also works, but this gives you a much thinner kerf, which gives you a little bit more precision. So let's put in our battery. Let's line this guy up. Like butter. Still a little bit more, but look at how clean that is. And I wasn't even putting any weight on the tool itself. I'm just letting basically the weight of the tool and my arms kind of push through it, slowly removing out all the metal, and that's just so clean. Take a little bit of sandpaper or a file and just clean that right up and you're good to go. It also cuts pretty straight, and even without sort of having any sort of brace or thing like that, I was able to get a nice right angle cut. So this thing, big win. Oh, looks like we got a question. What do we got, Jesse?
Question is no oil for the bandsaw?
I've seen a few different options. The manual doesn't require it. So you might want to look into some sort of a metalworking forms and stuff like that. I typically don't use it for that. I'm also typically only using that tool for kind of smaller cuts, so heat buildup hasn't been too much of an issue. The other thing too is that if you're not pushing too hard and really forcing the tool does a really good job of using the blade to remove the material and not build up too much heat. So there might be some theories out there about extending the life of those bandsaw blades with a little bit of lubricant, but I haven't seen it to be essential, particularly for cuts like this. Great question. All right. Really excited to have these channels at Home Depot. Another application that I like it for is for cutting this kind of stuff. This stuff, I don't even know exactly what it's called. It's just a galvanized corner bracket with pre-drilled holes. You'll see it a lot for kind of like signposts and stuff like that. Out here in the desert, I love using this stuff to repair fences, for chicken coops and the such. Drilling holes through steel is totally doable, as we just saw, but it does take some time. And if you're doing a lot of holes, like where you're bolting on some mesh or something like that, having pre-drilled holes is great. It's also got a galvanized coating, which is going to help us with corrosion and rust. And here's my clamps. Here we go. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to clamp this angle section, and this would also apply if you're cutting just solid angle steel as well. I'm clamping the downside of the angle towards me. That way I have a nice consistent line for the backstop on the belt sand or the bandsaw to rest against. Okay. The other thing I like about this is you see there are these holes and it's a pretty narrow gap in between them. So what I like about this is I can really line up the blade. I don't have to cut on a hole. I can actually get right in there and go right in between them. So I just have less finished work to do. Looks like we got another question.
What is the throat size on the bandsaw?
I don't know. It looks like it's about 3 inches. Assuming that's what a throat is. All right, so we're lining it up right in between the holes. And the bandsaw pop off. Brett, why don't you put this back on? Looks like I got a little wobbly with it and maybe should have tightened it. While we're waiting for that, I'll show you a different option, and that's using the angle grinder. Now, when working with the angle grinder, you're going to be throwing out a lot more sparks. And so a fireproof shirt or a light welding jacket is recommended. You don't want to end up with a whole bunch of little forearm marks on the, like a burnt up Popeye. I sort of had those accumulate over the years. So here we're just going to draw the lines on either side. So you kind of got a little scratch line right there with the bandsaw. And we're going to draw a down line. So this is the advantage of the bandsaw versus the angle grinder. So with the angle grinder, we're going to have to cut it in 2 different lines and make sure those line up. Where with the bandsaw, we can go all the way down. You really don't want to go through that kind of depth from the top down with a thin cutting wheel on an angle grinder. The other thing with the angle grinder is we're going to want to use hearing protection and gloves. It does throw off quite a bit of sparks, and it's a pretty loud tool in addition to that. So we'll glove up. The angle grinder is probably the tool I use most often now. With the shipping container house, I was using it just about every day, cutting all the doors and windows, cutting the steel reinforcement. Now, we got the cutting guard on too, so we're nice and secure. We're going to make sure we're going to be conscious of the direction that we're throwing the sparks. And we're just going to follow those lines. Wait for that blade to stop. So with this one, you really want to have to kind of reclamp in between and adjust the position. So it's a little bit more process there, but with the power of the angle grinder, the actual cutting is faster. You probably just lose a little bit of time in the repositioning of the material. Blade stop. Now, this gave us a little bit of like a burr on the end. And again, that's kind of why you want to wear gloves when you're handling material. So it heats up, it has a lot of power, but you get a little bit of a lip there. So you kind of want to see, you can kind of bent that up right there. So that will still require some sort of finish work to smooth that out. Now for that, I'd also use an angle grinder, but this with a different attachment. This is called a flat disc. I use these for power carving on heavy pieces of wood and for rounding over the edges of steel. And it's really aggressive. This is not like an orbital sander. This will remove material super fast. So we just want to just lightly touch these outside. Round over those edges. So let's give it another shot with the bandsaw. Once again, we're going to switch it where the downside is near us. Take two. There we go. So it goes a little slow when you're cutting the broad part, but then once it gets to that thin part, whoo, just like the way the saw just took it right through there super fast. And again, you'll notice the cleanness of that cut. So from now, we could just take these pieces, we could use these to reinforce some sort of outside corner that's a little bit weak. Don't have to drill any holes. Slotted connections allow a little bit of movement, so this stuff can come in really handy and it's inexpensive. I'm actually thinking about doing a couple chicken coop projects, and I think I'll be using a lot of it. All right, so on to the rotary tool. But actually, you know what, first, let me show you one other kind of cool thing that I've gotten into more recently. So, I'd say the most common reason I do runs to the hardware store at Home Depot is to get a piece of hardware that I don't have in the very many miscellaneous hardware drawers that I got. So, I'll often have the right bolt size in terms of diameter, but I'll often need a 1.5 inch one instead of a 2 inch one. Now you could always let the bolt be a little bit longer, but if it's a furniture piece, that's another thing to snag against and cause a cut or a scratch. So the ability to shorten bolts or cut custom pieces of threaded rod is a pretty nice one for a DIYer or someone that's doing home improvement or building larger stuff outside. So one of the applications where I had to cut threaded rod before was I made concrete countertops. Now that's a great project because countertops are expensive and you can make really nice concrete ones for inexpensive. So the thing that I did though is I made 3.5-inch thick countertops. Now that's way thicker than normal. And I needed a piece of threaded rod to hold the faucet to the underside of that thicker countertop. The threaded rod that came with the faucet was only about 2 inches thick because they weren't anticipating these heavy duty countertops. So rather than having to order and wait for that part to get there, just went right to Home Depot, got some threaded rod and cut it to the exact length that I needed. Now I'm going to hold this in a vise. I'm just using a couple of paint sticks because I don't want to put so much pressure on it in the interest of holding it still that I smash all these threads that I might need to go through. So I just got a little piece of wood on either side. And if you have trouble getting this all set up, a little bit of super glue to hold the wood to the jaws of the vise. It's a tip from Jesse. All right, we got gloves. And once again, we're going with the angle grinder. Although the bandsaw would be fine here as well. Okay, what, can I come around a little bit? Okay, so that cut was pretty clean, but often after you cut steel like this, you have a hard time getting a nut on there. So again, we'll switch to the flat disc just to sand down the edges a little bit so that our nuts go on real smooth. So now, with that, you're capable of making your custom length nuts and bolts, cutting threaded rod, and doing all sorts of fun stuff. I've actually been seeing these used to hang planters from a ceiling recently. Got another question. What do we got, Jeff?
Do you have a favorite Ryobi tool?
So I would say the angle grinder, because I think like it would be my desert island tool. You can cut wood, you can cut steel, you can cut stone. I use it for cutting tile. You can sand things. You can pretty much do everything except drill holes. But with a power carving attachment, you can certainly burr a hole through a slab too. So I would say the angle grinder by far. It's also small and compact. It's also the tool that you would want in a zombie apocalypse, because if you had to get through a steel door that was locked, man, you can go through just about anything. I was actually thinking about doing a safe cracking video using just an angle grinder, but I don't know if the safety police would like that. Shout out to Matt. Let's see. So, up next, another tool that's in the new HP line. Check out this little thing. This is that brushless. Brushless is good. It means it has a more powerful motor that's very efficient. Cutoff tool, and I really like it because it's a one-hander. So let me give you a little demo of one of the features that I find really useful. It's got like an adjustable depth on the blade guard. So you can slide this up and down. You can also has a whole bunch of different blades that you can put on it. You can even get some diamond ones, which I've been experimenting with for cutting tile. Right now we just have a basic abrasive tool, and we're going to use this to cut some wire mesh. But first we're going to do a little quick setup on the workstation. Don't need this vise anymore. So out here in the California desert, stucco and plaster are more common exterior home building materials. It holds up really well under the sun. You can get that kind of nice Santa Barbara, Mission Pueblo aesthetic, and it's a relatively cost-effective exterior material option for a home. But as one of the underlayment materials that's often used with stucco or plaster is steel mesh or wire lath. And typically, I've always cut this by hand using tin snips, and it's not fun. You get a lot of cut up wrists and knuckles, and it's also really slow. So here's the mesh that we're going to be experimenting with today. I recently used some stuff like this to make a concrete chair, used it as the sort of reinforcement. And if you were cutting this with tin snips, once you get to about right here, the mesh is like all over the place. And so you have to kind of like pull it up to make room for it to go through. When you're pulling up one side to create space for your hand and the shears, it kind of pushes you off that straight line that you were going for. It also leaves you with really bent up edges that aren't very clean. So sometimes if you want something like this, for, let's say for a chicken wire, because you want something that has a little bit of a tighter mesh and a little bit more substantial than just the twisted wire, you might need sort of really precise cuts. Also, if you're dealing with a kitchen or bathroom and you want to use that new lime strong plaster, which is really, really nice looking, you might need to cut very specific sort of angles in this, and again, the precision is going to come in handy. So we want to raise it up off this sort of plywood surface that I got right here to be my temporary workbench. And as always with metal, we want to secure the material. But this time we're going to secure it with a 2x4. And this is going to do two things. One, it's going to hold the material in place, but two, it's also going to give us kind of like a fence, sort of a reference line to help guide it. I'm not really going to be pressing too hard against it, but just as a general reference, it'll get us close enough. Got a question?
Do you suggest brushless tools over non-brush? Over brush tools?
Brushed or brushless? So, what I think is really interesting about brushless tools, no one feature is going to destroy all your capabilities. But you really want to think about how technology improves. So, 6 years ago, cordless circular saws, they worked, but if you were going to do multiple 8-foot cuts on a 3/4 inch sheet of plywood, you're going to be recharging your batteries a lot. So what's happened is the batteries have gotten better, the motors, particularly the brushless motors, have gotten better, and so the tools are improving in 2 steps. The batteries are offering more power, and the tools are using less energy and having more power as the output. So when you think about it, and then the other interesting thing is, the blades have gotten better. Circular saw blades, when I was a kid, didn't have like carbide tips. They were just these like stamped out pieces of steel that were super dull. And yeah, so when all 3 of those things get better, the blades, the batteries, and the motors, you're exponentially increasing your power and output. Now, I can't remember the last time I used a corded circular saw. I still have one, I think, in my Boston shop, but I'm all sort of battery, and that means all brushless. So if you can afford the sort of cost upgrade, it's a slight one, I would go with brushless. All right, got that all secured. Gonna go with gloves since handling the mesh is a little bit sharp. Hearing protection. And our one-handed cutoff saw. All right. So this can actually rotate in 2 different directions. Right now I'm going to have the forward direction, which will throw sparks back. Look at that. Nice clean cut, way easier than tin snips. And look how flat that's sitting down. That might not seem like much, but if you're doing an underlayment and you have to do plaster that's an extra 1/4 inch thick, off of a big surface, that's a lot of extra material. So being able to cut really flat and not have this warped, waffly piece
is a huge advantage. All right, I think the last thing that we'll demo, so start queuing up those questions, is a scoring and bending technique that I like to use for steel bars and plate steel. I actually did a video series on my YouTube channel, Homemade Modern, that sort of introduced basic steel projects mixed in with some woodworking. So if you just look at like an intro to working with metal on the Homemade Modern channel, you'll find a bunch of cool projects. And they started off as some simple sort of nightstands and benches, and then we worked our way all the way up to sort of basic welding and stuff like that. So the other cool thing about metalworking is the tools you need are way more space efficient. With an angle grinder, a drill, and a welder, I can do all sorts of metalworking projects and have tool storage that only requires a box about the size of an apple box. So compared to like table saw and sort of big bench tops tools with woodworking, metalworking is really compact. You can do it out of the back of your truck. What do we got?
Can you tell them again what the name of the little rotary cutter is?
So as part of the new HP line, there are new, more compact tools. Check out the whole line, it's pretty awesome. And this is called a rotary cutoff tool. Rotary, because it has a little spinning blade, and cutoff, well, I think you'll figure that out. But the one-handedness and the light weight of it makes it feel like you have really good control. You can kind of brace yourself with your offhand and really focus on just guiding it through with the other hand. So highly recommend it, particularly for light steel work like this mesh and stuff. I probably would go up to an angle grinder or the metal bandsaw if I'm starting to cut through like thicker pieces of angle steel. I wouldn't really, even though it could go through, and I have tested it out, cut tube steel with this. In general, I would use the bigger, more heavy duty angle grinder or the bandsaw for larger sections. But for quick stuff, and when I want to use the depth control just to score things, I like this guy. All right, let's clear the surface. Any other questions while I'm reconfiguring? Now, there's other metals out there as well. They tend to be easier to work with. That's why I'm sort of showing more steel, because it's kind of the trickiest. Aluminum comes up in a lot of DIY projects. So drilling holes, very much the same. You don't have so many problems with the heat buildup because the aluminum tends to whip the heat away because it's so conductive. I would probably use the bandsaw for cutting this. Now, where I like to use this material, which is also available at Home Depot, is for outdoor planters. So you're making outdoor planters and you might be using a synthetic deck board or some 2x lumber. Bracing the corners from the inside is really important. Now, you could use a 4x4 post, but then that's eating up space in the planters and you see the top of that looking down. So what I like is to use this. Aluminum won't rust and corrode. You can drill some holes through it. It's a lot softer than steel. And you can make your own long corner brackets that go the entire depth of the planter. So aluminum is a very easy material to work with and way easier than steel, and it cuts up nice. So yeah, take advantage of that non-corrosive ability for some of those outdoor projects. Okay, so we're going back to sort of bending and scoring steel, and brings us to a real thin bar. One thing, picking up flat steel with gloves on is a little bit tricky. All right. As always, we're going to secure the material. But again, one of my favorite things about Ryobi is the versatility. They got more tools on the same battery line than anyone else does. And I can go from metalworking, woodworking, building new houses, all with the same battery set. I think they even have a hot tub speaker, which we may or may not have used recently. So shout out for a lot of creative engineers. The other thing, and actually Brett, can you go around and grab this? I think it's around somewhere. is they have, so if I'm on the job site, especially doing construction stuff, you know, your phone's probably your second most important tool that you got. The ability to have to charge your cell phone from one of the Ryobi batteries is really great. And we'll bring that out in a little bit. But they made this little clip, it fits right onto your Ryobi batteries, and you can charge your cell phone from it. Game changer. So it's all those options that keep me loyal. Okay. Hearing. When I first got started, the biggest safety, probably slightly negligent area that I was in hearing protection. Use these. They still work like over your little AirPods, and it just makes life a lot easier, and you don't get those sort of weird banging headaches afterwards. Okay. So, cutoff tool. Take out the battery. I'm just going to take my glove off for this. We're going to adjust it so that we're just barely nicking the material. We don't want to cut all the way through. We just want to scratch it and put a little groove into it. All right. So right now you can see it's pretty strong. We probably could bend it if we really forced it. So just a little scratch like that. Let's see. Might have to go a little bit deeper, but we'll test it. No, still bending, so we'll go a little bit deeper. Okay, a little farther. Oh yeah, there we go. And now you can get nice controlled bends exactly where you want. So I've done this I had to make some brackets at a very specific angle. And we did this for the renovation of like a 1940s bus that we were doing for a different sponsor. And we needed to make a bracket that fit inside of this bus and was at an unusual angle. So we just scored it, bent it, held it up to the inside of the bus to make sure it was the right angle, and then we welded in like a little support right there. Now if you don't have a welder, you could still do this. And the way I would do it then is I would start to bring the wood back in to reinforce. Whoop, drop my AirPod. Okay, so you really want to, especially if you're doing DIY projects or home improvement on a budget, you really want to get the most out of everything rather than just, I need this specialty bracket, let me go get a welder. So what you could do is you could then trace this line on a piece of plywood and then make a little piece of plywood that just reinforces this area, drill your holes through here, and make this kind of custom angles of brackets. You'd have to sort of screw the plywood through on this side, but it's a pretty clever way where you use wood and compression, and then you use the steel as this sort of attachment surface. So we got that little charger. Yeah. So check this out. It's just a little USB port. Plugs right onto your batteries, and now you can charge your phone wherever you're working. So, excellent stuff. Everything we use now is electronic, and we've also charged our camera batteries, all sorts of things on remote job sites with that. All right, well that's it for this little demo. Keep those questions coming. We'll keep the feed going for a few more minutes. Looks like we got one.
Yeah, do you have any recommendations for someone who cuts a lot of foam for cosplay stuff? Do you have any tool recommendations for that?
Foam. You know, we used a hot wire saw for foam when I was in college. Jigsaw is what comes to mind. I would use sort of a fine blade, and I might clamp the foam down. The big thing that I would think about is how do you support the foam so it doesn't get torn up and down with the movement of the blade. So what I might do is use some thin plywood, like 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch plywood, put it on either side of the foam, and then use my jigsaw so I have that sort of 2 layers clamped down so it doesn't just rip the foam up and get a lot of tear out. Awesome. Well, Be sure to check out the Homemade Modern channel. Stay tuned for more virtual workshops coming from Ryobi. The last one was with Rogue Engineer Jameson, I believe, and pretty cool stuff. Shout out to Jameson. And until next time, bye. Save the video.
It didn't save last time I did it, so I'll let you do it so you can be in charge of that. All I did was hit end, so then you say end now, right?
That's really the only option, huh?
Yeah.
And it didn't save it?
That's the only thing that it said. I clicked the little X. I hope that everyone can hear us having this conversation. I asked the group if